Hey Rich, how are you?
Hello.
All right, so we're going to have Vashti today on a podcast. She's a pro. She's vegan, she's a DJ, she's a producer, she's a director, she does sneakers. You like sneakers. She was the first person who did Air Jordan for girls, okay? So amazing, but we have to step up. She's vegan, she knows all the food, she travels all over. So I want to make something special so she would love our food. Curly zucchini fries. Let's do your sloppy jaw, the ones that you created, and we'll have loaded fries and side of blue cheese. Okay?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. I think she's gonna like it. Thank you.
Hi, good morning from the East Village. I'm Eddie Brill, host of OG Talk. Original gangsta is what OG is normally known for, but here is the Organic Grill. My dear friend Vlad Grinberg is here.
Hey guys.
And he's our co-host, and we're very happy to have our friend Vashti here, who's never been in this restaurant, oddly enough.
And I'm a local.
And
It
she
doesn't
should
make
be
any
ashamed.
sense. I am ashamed. I'm very.
But that's going to change. As you know, you'll see, and we'll have the food. It's amazing. Most of the guests, not all of them, but most of the guests I know, people I've met through life, comedians, actors, friends of mine. You're one of the few people I had never met before. But what happened is we ran an event for Gene Bauer. And Gene Bauer is head of the Farm Sanctuary up in Watkins Glen. And you were there in the
Not
helping
only
out.
she was there, she was like main person to help me out.
Right.
We had like 200 people we
Yeah, we
served.
were
huh?
serving food.
You were
Yeah.
doing good.
Thank you.
And interesting enough, you know, people who come and volunteer, they're always wonderful people. But one of the people who were on our crew said, "You know who that person is?" And that's Vashti. And it was like, he was so amazed. So after the event was over, I did some research. I'm like, oh my God, this person has done so many wonderful things, and in the same vein of what all of us want to do. And that's why we grabbed you down here and said, please be our guest. So we're so proud. You were helping out Gene Bauer. How did you meet the people at Farm Sanctuary, and how did you get involved?
Okay, so one of my best friends, Carl Lopez,
You're right.
who works with.
I actually reached out to him to ask some interesting stories.
Okay.
So I'll have it at the end. I'll have it at the
I
end.
hope they're all
I'll
good
have
for
it
safe
at
for
the end.
camera.
See how close Carl is to you.
Yeah. So he basically asked me to help, and I said, you know, anything for the animals, I'm always down. And he's one of my best friends, so I was like, if there's any way I can ever support, I've DJ'd for them, and I've done things where I could give my services. So that was how I ended up there.
That's
Yeah.
really great. Now, you went to SVA, School of Visual Arts in New York, and as soon as you graduated, you hit the ground running and started doing these amazing things in many different categories. Have you been that way your whole life, where you're the kind of person who is a multitasker? Obviously, now that's what you do.
Yeah, I feel like maybe as a kid, I think I just wanted to be in New York. That's all I wanted to do. I grew up in Albany, New York,
Right.
upstate. So I was obsessed with art and fashion. Was like, okay, I just want to move to New York.
How did you get obsessed with art and culture? Were your folks involved?
No, both of my parents are. They came from Trinidad and Tobago, immigrated to Albany. My dad was a car mechanic. My mom worked at a nursing home, and I don't think there's like a. Not to say that doesn't make you creative or artistic, but knowing them, I know that they don't really have much interest in those worlds. But
Were they supportive?
they were confused. They were like, if you can pay your rent, then we don't care. Just do what you want to do. So, but I had an older brother who was into voguing in the 90s, like gay club world. And so I kind of got put onto like the club scene through that, and New York City and raves and all of that kind of thing. And my sister was always really into music. So, you know, I was always interested in music that she put me on to, like Depeche Mode and the Smiths.
Right.
So I had like a really interesting background of people who influenced me.
How did Depeche Mode and the Smiths influence you and lead you into a world where you're working with Drake and Madonna and these folks?
Well, you know, I think that for me, I've always been able to, even if something's different or it's not something that is considered for my community or for someone that looks like me, I've always been able to sort of appreciate something for what it is, even if it's a completely different culture, different language. And for me, a lot of those musicians were opposite of the worlds that I grew up in. But you know, I really loved like their lyricism, or I could really like, you know, understand their fashion statements. And I think for me, working with a lot of mainstream artists, especially in the hip hop world, I think that sometimes they see that I can appreciate things that are opposite to what we are been taught to like, you know, so.
Well, if you look through the history of the world, and anything, whether it's art or fashion, everyone's influenced by somebody else. You know, myself as a comedian, I love George Carlin, and he loved Lenny Bruce, and the person loved before them, and hopefully you influence other people just by being your true, authentic self. How did you go? Now you're an influencer. It's kind of interesting. It's a responsibility that comes with being an influencer. How does that make you feel?
You know, the word influencer is a strange word.
It is.
I mean, I accept it because it is the world that I'm in. I think that my responsibility to anyone who's sort of inspired by me or interested or looking at me is to always provide the backstory, because I think influencers today easily can just put something on Instagram and then they're influential, but it's like there's no backstory. Like what you know inspired you to get to that story. So I think for me, it's always the storytelling as wherever I can. You know, just posting a hashtag or a photo is one thing, but I think it's just also having the, you know, the story, right? So
right, it's a wider influence that you have. Looking at your website, I can see that all the different things you do all kind of relate to the same thing. It comes again to compassion, and it's not just throwing things against the wall to see what sticks.
Right.
You know, for instance, you know, in the vegan world, you know, where Vlad is a major component, and it's not only about the food. It's about the service and the community, and I think he can relate to that, right? To what you put out on your table influences how people eat, how they live, how their health, what kind of health.
Yeah, for me it's important for people not just for them to belong to communities that I admire and appreciate, but also to have different kind of experiences in life. And for me, it doesn't really matter why they're coming here. As a matter of fact, whatever brings them here, it's good for me. I'm ready to embrace them and to have a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very important.
Even though people like you who never been here.
Well, that's going to change. She's already here today. So when I was in college, you know, all my friends were all funny, and we formed a comedy group. And out of that, all of us moved ahead. So I looked at your bio. In 2004 you graduate. 2005 you're doing 10,000 things. Is it because of the people you went to school with? How did the transition go from doing it in college to?
I think it was probably panic mode. It was you know, Sally Mae is calling immediately for the student loans to be repaid.
Sally!
So, yeah, so for me I was like, okay, what can I do? And also I think because, you know, my parents are, you know, from the West Indian culture, the Caribbean culture, and it's sort of like it's a stereotype that they always have like 4 jobs. And so my parents always looked at me.
Food is here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there we go.
Right.
My parents sort of looked at me as like a lazy American kid. I was the first American born.
Right.
So I think I was always like paranoid that I wasn't doing enough. So I think that the multitasking came from that, really. Yeah.
Because I'm the same way. My parents weren't artistic or anything, but my sister's a singer, and my brother's you know, behind the camera, and another brother does something very interesting. And our parents are just funny people, and that's how that sometimes works. How did you get into the vegan world?
So I, growing up, was really interested in animals, and I thought that if I didn't make it as an artist, I would become a veterinarian or something with animals. And I started off rescuing cats in my neighborhood. Like a lot of kids in where I grew up were just kind of abusive and just, I don't know, maybe immature. So they would, you know, be really kind of unkind to these animals. So I would grab them and take them home with me. And then shortly after, I met a friend of mine who lived in my neighborhood who was vegan and straight edge. And he showed me documentaries, and so it kind of like escalated my like.
Tell me about straight edge.
So straight edge, for anyone who doesn't know, was a movement in. It started really, I think, in the '80s because of Minor Threat. It was a hardcore band.
Oh, right.
And they had a song that was called I think it was like Straight Edge or Straighter Than an Edge. But it was basically proclaiming this, abstaining from drugs, alcohol, and also.
Do you identify yourself as a straight edge?
Not anymore. Okay, I'm now I'm a popular DJ in nightclubs around the world, so saying no to alcohol is a little bit trickier these days. But I do, I do really support the movement. I think it's a very positive cause for the most part.
Let me introduce you to our food.
While
too.
we're bringing the
Okay.
food, just one other thing is speaking to make the transition. You're talking about alcohol, but there is organic wine. There is
Yeah,
organic
absolutely.
stuff. So it's not like you're just having the sugar-filled bottle
You're
of
right,
wine.
yeah.
So that's that. Now to Vlad.
All right.
Tell us what we have
So
here.
this is loaded fries with our
Oh my
own
goodness.
made cheese.
Okay.
All right. I have extra place for us to share, and we are fine
you.
with eating food, and you shouldn't
Yeah.
restrain yourself.
Okay.
Do that.
Thank you.
All right.
For me, yay.
So this is, we just started to make this.
Oh
I
my
want you
God,
to
this
try it.
is
It's a sloppy
great.
joe.
Oh wow.
I
Okay.
just had this blue cheese on the side. It looks like really good. It's made out of lentil, quinoa, and all sorts of
What kind
mushrooms.
of quinoa you call it? What is it called? The quinoa?
Yeah.
Lion tail?
Yeah, and this is zucchini fries. I
Wow.
honestly didn't understand the question.
Oh,
so.
I wouldn't. It sounded like there was a name in front of
No,
quinoa.
lentil.
Okay,
That's
it's your
my-
accent.
that's my
I'm
accent,
sorry.
right.
I thought you said lion
Oh,
tail.
well, now
you
they're
know, it's
making
like
fun of me here.
no, not making
All
fun.
right,
I'm
okay.
just showing
Okay,
you my
you don't have to
my
try
idiocy.
it. You don't have to try it. No
Okay.
problem.
No, bring it back. Okay.
All right.
I love this. I had this before
I wanted
with
to
this
ask
lentil.
you. I read about your growing up, and you were surrounded by a lot of kids who skateboard, and it was like a little bit of a tomboy growing up. So how did you still remain to be so feminine and fashionable?
I think that came later. For a long time, I was not fashionable and feminine. It's definitely taken some time for me to sort of embrace that portion of me. I think a lot of growing up for me was being anti everything, against this, and I'll never wear pink, and I'll never wear makeup, and and then you evolve at your own time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Don't tell me it's not typical for teenagers.
Yeah, my nephew, who's amazing, he's 33.
Oh.
He is a sweet kid, and works as a second cameraman assistant in film industry. When he was a teenager, he was a douche. You know what I mean? But he's the sweetest guy in the world now.
Oh, what an uncle, huh?
Yeah, he knows I love him, but I'm just saying, as kids, I know I did the same thing. You rebel against what's going on. Now, what do you think about sort of this cancel culture that we deal with? Say, like Kevin Hart, to me, is a phenomenal guy. And at one part of his life, he made a homophobic remark about his son. He regrets it. 10 years later, he said, I made a mistake. And he doesn't get to host the Academy Awards because people don't celebrate the fact that he's evolved into
Right.
a person. They look at what mistake he made and glom onto that in the past. How do you see the world through that sort of evolvement?
I don't believe in cancel culture. I think it's toxic. I think that we're all evolving in our own way, in our own time, and I think that it's important to have conversations. I'm also now at this point in my life sort of embracing that there's not necessarily a right and a wrong. I feel like that's a very loaded statement, but
Yeah.
I just think that, something that I could have said something, I'm sure I said something 5-10 years ago that was offensive and didn't realize that, that could be considered cruel or, hurtful. So I think that it's important to just, I don't know, also take into consideration, the time of when it happened, the person's story. Again, it's not making an excuse for it, but it is sort of having a better understanding of it. Because it's funny now, I have friends who are vegan now who 10-15 years ago were making fun of me.
Yeah, sure.
And
Right,
so it's interesting to see the shift, but it's like, if you want to even evolve change and you want someone to maybe see your perspective, or if it's becoming vegan, or if it's agreeing with your statement. It's you can't attack people. That's the
and
quickest
instead of
way
like,
to get people
we caught you, right?
Right.
It's a
let's all grow together.
always
Right.
in indication of growth and maturity and understanding of things that you didn't understand before. And it doesn't apply to everyone. Maybe someone still sticking to their guns and saying those things and still thinking that way. That's something to consider. But you can hold it against someone who thought about it differently, like about veganism yesterday and now.
And Dave Chappelle recently had said something. He said, a lot of comedians, he's seen some people be racist and see some people be homophobic, but you have discussions about it. And because in this world we need to have discussions, and we have that more and more nowadays. So, we're older men here in this community watching what's going on. What do you see that's growing and evolving, and what's the next step for society from your perspective? Because you said the word perspective, which triggered something. No one can argue with your perspective. They can argue if you shit on someone and say you're no good. I don't think that's healthy. But if you have a perspective, it doesn't mean you're right or wrong. It's your perspective. So what do you see as an influencer coming up for that you can teach us and show us that you believe that's going to happen? Long question.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that the conversation of being open to other people's perspective is really happening, and I think that I think right now it's a strange time, because even with politics, people name call and then they attack, and it's like you think that your perspective is the correct one, and so then you feel like you can step on someone else. So I'm hoping that we can learn that even if someone is doing something that you might perceive as negative or evil or whatever it is, that you can have the conversation or at least communicate properly. A book that I'm reading that's really amazing for that is Nonviolent Communication.
Nonviolent Communication.
Yeah,
okay.
Marshall Rosenberg wrote it. He passed away, but it's phenomenal and fascinating, and it's just...
What do you find fascinating about it?
The idea that none of us communicate at all. Like, none of us are ever saying anything of what we actually mean. It's a lot of loaded ego and a lot of emotion that doesn't state like how we actually feel. Like, instead of saying, hey, when you said this, exactly this, it hurt my feelings. Not it hurt my feelings. You can't say that the other person hurt your feelings, because that's you allowing them. So the idea is that you say, I felt sad, or you actually name the emotion and say, I felt this way. And then offer a resolution. I would prefer if next time you spoke to me, you said something in a lower tone. The other thing about this book, sorry, it's fascinating.
No, it's okay.
This book also talks about how, we're all from around the world, all of us, right? We were raised differently.
And in your family, you were born in America, your brother and sister were not.
Yeah, so he uses the example of people in the workplace, and he says, there was one conflict that he had to resolve in a workplace where a gentleman was saying that his coworker yells at him, and it makes him stressed out. And he's like, why do you think she's yelling at you? Like, is she yelling at you, or is she just speaking in a tone that's louder? And she actually happened to be from another country, and she's like, oh, this is how we speak, like when we're talking to each other. So it's just, it's a very powerful book.
Yeah, and I find it interesting because, for years Americans felt like we were number one and all these other countries were secondary and tertiary. But you can learn so much from the community of the world. The world is, with the internet and with social media, the world is a much tighter place where we can find out what someone's thinking in another country 1 second later.
Right.
And I think that if we can accept that in everyone, I think that works better. There's a great book called The Four Agreements. It's one of my favorite books.
I agree with that.
And The Four Agreements talks about don't take things personally, because it's other people projecting their fears onto you.
Okay.
So to me, it reminds me of that book. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to eat some of this food and talk a little bit more.
Peace, love and light, world. It's your brother Fred Doc Beasley here with OG Talks, giving you news you can use, dropping jewels. For those who don't know, Hip Hop is Green is the first plant-based multimedia organization in the world. And we deal with a couple of pillars. 1, plant-based eating. 2, urban farming. 3, animal rights. 4, food justice. 5, exercise. And 6, sobriety. Now, if you want to be part of this organization that's all around the world with more than 15 chapters, and I'm the chapter president here in NYC, go to our website, www.hiphopisgreen.com. Fred, Doc Beasley, OG Talks, news you can use, and those are the Jews.
Welcome back. We're happy that you're still here with us. We're here with Vashti, and you're one of the things we were talking about this earlier, Vlad and I, about the Air Jordans. That you are one of the first, or the first female, the first. Explain the story without me finishing the question.
Okay, well, in 2010, I became the first woman to design a Jordan sneaker, which was a surprise to me. I had no idea that I was the first. I also.
How did you get involved? How did you get the chance to be the first?
So I, as a young tomboy, was obsessed with sneakers.
Right.
Jordans were like, the Mercedes of the sneaker world, and so I didn't grow up being able to afford Nikes really, or Jordans. So it wasn't until I became, I went to art school, and then I was like, oh, I can spend my hard-earned money now on sneakers. And it became sort of an obsession. I think with a lot of young people, if you don't have something when you're young, it becomes like, an obsession of yours. So for me, it was sneakers. And so when I moved to New York City, I was kind of known for a girl that always wore Jordans, especially at a time when it wasn't that common. It was sort of like a girl who wore Jordans was generally a girl in like the hood. And so
interesting perspective.
Yeah. So if working in Soho, you didn't see girls in fashion wearing Jordans, and you didn't see them wearing sneakers. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of a thing that stuck out, I think, to a lot of people. So I'm in New York City. I have a big birthday party, and this is sort of when I started directing. So I sort of had a following in my career. And for my birthday party, I really wanted to have a big party, invite anyone and everyone, and then I wanted to have a birthday cake in the form of a Jordan 3, which is my favorite model of a sneaker. And so I had this giant cake. It came out, and the images from the party ended up on like big blogs like Hypebeast, and sort of circulated around in the streetwear world. And so it became really popular. And a couple months later, I had run into a friend of mine who I thought was working at Nike, and then it turned out he was working at Brand Jordan, and I was like, oh, did you see my birthday cake? And he's like, oh my God, that's right, you're obsessed with Jordans. You should totally design one. Like, I'm gonna call you tomorrow. And it happened that naturally and randomly.
And it gives you confidence that, because now you're in the fashion world, and you're dealing with people who are names, although they're regular people, all with the same kind of goals and energy and perspective that you have. How do you keep yourself humble? Because one of the things I noticed about you immediately is how humble you are. You can't call yourself humble, and then you're not humble. But we could see it from on the outside in. You're very down to earth, and it's so powerful and so beautiful, and your message comes across much better that way. How about the people that you've met, like, say, Diddy and Drake and people like that?
And you did a lot of directing for them, right? And you did videos.
I worked with them, yeah. I think that, I don't know what the question was. Sorry.
Yeah, neither do I. I will be right back. No, we're back. What I was trying to say, what I want to say is that it's so nice that you're humble and you're putting all this work in.
Thank you.
But you're working with amazing people, and it's amazing to others, but they're regular people as well. How do you approach your business work with people in fashion and style and clothing? Because again, just your website, it's not only your opinion, it's other people's articles, other people's stuff that you find. And how do you make this nexus of people, and how do you find them?
I think
got through that question.
I don't know. I feel like when I'm working with, kind of big power players in that world, for me, I feel like, and I don't know if this is part of being humble or just the way I was raised, it's all about respect to the client or the company, and I feel like it's sort of how probably you approach with customers. It's like making sure everyone's having an experience, or that they're sort of being catered to. And I feel like with me in my work, it's really important for me to have everyone that I work with sort of have a really comfortable space, a comfortable time, but also to feel respected and to have all of their needs met, as well as mine, obviously. But and I think that with things like my site and my social media, it's always in an attempt to sort of share that same aesthetic, you know, just to have people on that same page.
Yeah. Now, what's next for you? What?
Well, I just got engaged.
Yay!
Thank you.
And we are the first announcement.
Yes. So I'm planning a wedding at this point. It's really interesting.
And we'll definitely deliver cake.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh,
Oh
there
my
you
God.
go.
Yes. So I think that, you know, as much as my work has been a focus for me, I think for me it's also spiritually evolving. You know, it wasn't until like last year that I decided to stop buying leather. I didn't even realize how much I was basically like wearing leather. So I mean, I haven't worn fur, or I stopped buying down a long time ago. So now it's just evolving, like for me, and however that means. So and trying to help, you know, spread the awareness of how I'm growing with the people that follow me. It's just to hopefully inspire them.
I also wanted to kind of point out to everyone who is listening, we are talking about influencers, and usually it's like young person who just kind of got viral and all of a sudden he is popular. You were grinding like for years and years, like at least 10 years doing all this kind of work. I listened to one of the interview. You started your blog like 10 years ago when nobody is doing it. And it just shows that to be OG, right, in any field, you have to really grind. You have to know your craft, and you have to put out ton of content. When I was doing research, we got so much information about you, how you doing directing, you doing DJing, you doing videos, you doing music.
Fantastic.
With like Justin Bieber and other people. It's amazing.
What have you learned in the 10 years?
I think what I've learned is just to be consistent in your goals. I think for me, you know, to your point, what you're saying, I think some people who don't have an understanding of me might think, oh, you just kind of made it and then that's it. But they might not have seen the 10 years of what it has
grind,
been.
Steve Martin said it took him 10 years to make it overnight.
Oh, yeah. So I feel like it's just being consistent, because a lot of times in the past 10, 15 years, there were times where I felt like I was failing, you know, and it's part of the success, like the failures, the mini failures or the major failures. So.
And that's a huge thing. You know, one of the things I had learned, the word sin, a lot of people look at it as such a negative thing. And sine, S-I-N-E, is the Latin word for mistake. So when you make a mistake, you're learning from these mistakes, and you grow from the mistakes. You take steps backwards to take 10 steps forward. So you see it from a great perspective.
I wanted to say something as it really triggered me when I was preparing and checking some of your content, which was like really interesting for me. You were talking about your parents, how you were growing up, and there was not necessarily like best scenario for kids to grow up with. And I grew up in a similar atmosphere, and unfortunately my child was experiencing something after I divorced her mom, and I was like really interested in your perspective when you were talking about it, and you told something that kind of was important to me. You said, I might not necessarily heard what I wanted to hear from my parents, like that they understand the mistakes they made, and there was never really like this wonderful closure like you have in a movie, like catharsis, and people are happy and they hug it out. You said that they are not probably people who are capable in doing this, but I still love them and accept it, and it's moving on. I'm not stopping on this conflict.
Right.
And there was another thing, I'm sorry, that was very important to me, like the level of reflection you have, and obviously you did some self-therapy and some therapy. When you were talking about being bullied, and you said, yes, I'm not kind of condoning the behavior, and I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but there was part of me that played this and maybe contributed to being bullied. I was like, whoa, that was so
Tell me about
interesting.
that. So tell me about the
You
bullying.
really did research. I appreciate that. It's interesting because I feel like I would not have been able to resonate with a lot of the things I've said recently. So in my younger days, I think that
So we shouldn't hold it against you.
Exactly. But I think, you know, for me now, I've realized that, you know, sometimes, you know, the idea of a victim or being the victim of something, sometimes you don't realize you might be playing a part of that. And so, you know,
It's a very mature perspective.
yeah. And I think that also being able to take a step back and learn from that has been important for me. Whereas before, I kind of felt like a wounded, you know, animal. I was like, oh, like this happened to me. But it's like, you know, in so many ways, like holding on to that sort of disempowering emotion, you continue that sort of like path, and also you can't ever evolve. Like you don't see where did that change me? How did that improve upon me? And I think it's really important that, you know, the self-reflection and the honesty is like key to sort of like for all of us evolving, you know.
I agree. And so let everyone know your website so that people can go to it.
Vashtie.com.
Spell it for them, please.
VASHTIE.com.
Now the S in your website doesn't have the dollar sign
Yeah, you
yet.
can't have that.
Yet you do have the dollar sign in the Vashti, which is
Yes.
kind of
Yeah,
wonderful.
she's getting engaged. She needs those
Yeah,
dollar
you need some
signs.
dollar signs there. We'll put an extra, so it's Vashtie.com. We so appreciate you coming here. It's so
Thank
nice to
you
meet
so
you.
much.
We get
Thank you very much.
and you'll come here a lot, and you'll have food to go, and
Yes.
the food is amazing.
And food after to go.
Yes, it'll be terrific. For the Organic Grill, I'm so happy for this episode. Want to thank our incredible crew as always. Who do we want to say hello to? Any of our friends? On the
Oh, we want to say hello to Mike Perrine from Everyday Detox. He's my mentor for years and years. He was actually pastry chef here long time ago, and he's an amazing nutritionist. He teaches about detox, and his studio is in New York. You can check it, Everyday Detox Podcast.
Okay, that's fantastic. For Vashti, for Vlad, for all of our crew, and all of you guys at home, I'm Eddie Brill. Thank you for tuning in to the OG Talk.
Thank you, Vashti.
Thank you.
Yay!